So
Okay.
just wanted to say welcome everyone to this session of the SLO Symposium. And we titled this session, Understanding the New Learner, really getting a sense of that from San Jose City College's Quest, and very excited about hearing their story. Today, we thought in order to understand San Jose's growth and journey, we get a sense as to who they are and look at kind of the journey from what were they trying to solve, how they did it, what they encountered along the way, and next steps to their success. Before we launch completely into the webinar, I wanted to make you aware of a few things. And that is the chat is open, so feel free to chime into the chat, ask any good questions. We love to hear from you. I think all of us on the call are talkers. We've all been educators, teachers, and still are. So I'm happy to hear from you. Additionally, what you might find is that we do have an interpreter, and just want to say thank you to Chrissy. And I think we have a couple folks that will help to interpret today. They will be spotlighted for this session. So if you want to see all of us as presenters, you can avoid the spotlight to look at some of us, but the interpreter will be our primary as far as the spotlight goes, meaning you'll see them most clearly, and making sure that you really are able to retain and gain all the information from this presentation. Lastly, this presentation is recorded, so the recording will be available to you after the session. All right, with that, we can get started. If you want to go ahead, Judith.
Sure. Well, my name is Judith Bell, and as it says, I'm fine arts faculty. I've been with the college since 1996, so that's 26 years almost, I think. Long time. Currently, I'm the Academic Senate President, and I've been one of the SLO coordinators along with Dr. McKinley for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And yeah, it's probably an interesting journey how an art teacher got to be an SLO coordinator, but it's been very interesting. And I'll pass it on to Dr. McKinley.
Thank you, Judith. So you wear so many hats. So you are so capable. So don't be so modest. So my name is Hui Min McKinley. I am an ESL faculty. I joined San Jose City College since 2018, I think. So it's been about 4 or 5 years journey. And so as Judith indicated, the serving as the SLO co-coordinator, that has been quite a few years between us, and then we have really good working relationship, and we get things going. So it's really been an honor to work with Judith, and thank you.
Fantastic. And my name is Rachel DeWingens-Beeler. I'm the Senior Director of Communication and Services here at Illumin. And I've also had the joy over the last couple of years to work with San Jose City, and specifically these folks here on the call, as they are really helping to grow and develop their community and their assessment processes. So with that, I'd like to just kick us off with just a little bit of an overview slide of the concept that we're talking about today, specifically around San Jose's quest for assessment and developing assessment processes, practices, and data review. So with that in mind, when we think about assessments in general, and this means directly learning outcome assessments, that is the tool we use to gather that data to be able to make informed decisions. And those informed decisions can really impact the overall institution's offerings, as well as our ability to support student success and completion. So what you're seeing here on the screen, just to get us thinking, is we've already started to see that volatility in enrollment in general at institutions, and we're all on a quest to improve it. And in addition to that, we want to retain the students and get them towards completion. So looking at assessment as one of those formative tools to help us reach effectively that goal. And how do we do it well? In many cases, I'm sure many of you, I know for myself, working at my institutions, is that assessment or learning outcome assessment is embraced by some and not by others. But when we work collectively, we have the data to be able to support the overall institution success and each one of our students in our classroom. So with that, let's learn a little bit, I'm thinking, about San Jose's journey so we can take maybe in part some of these words of wisdom for our own colleges. So for all of those that are on the call, maybe it would help to just give a little bit of background, if you wouldn't mind, tell us about San Jose City, just giving us a sense as to who you are as an institution.
Okay. So I think there was a slide there. Yeah, we're actually we're the oldest community college. We're 101 years old. And one of the oldest in the state also. I think we're the second oldest or something. Anyway, that does have a bearing on things because, you know, you do tend to get a little set in your ways as you get older. And I don't think that our college is an exception to that in any way. We serve, we are an urban campus, and we do serve a very diverse population. I mean, I think that's true of most of our community colleges in California. However, we have, I think we're, you know, they have these rankings of who's got the most diverse, blah, blah, blah. We're up there in that. So we do have very, very diverse student population. One of the things about our student population that is a little different is that we tend to have older students. We tend to have students that are part-time. Now, again, that's not unusual, but we have a large percentage. I think it's like at least 70% of our students are part-time. And that poses its own challenges, as you can well imagine. We have a lot of returning students. We have a lot of students. We have a large CE program, career ed program, that, you know, I think has defined us as a college for a very long time. And that is still very, very important to us. And of course, that poses its own issues in terms of assessment as well. And I think we're facing the same challenges that all community colleges are facing, you know, enrollment drops, shifting to online learning, how to handle training for faculty, et cetera. It's, you know, there's the pandemic just brought a whole new set of issues to all of us. So that gives you a little bit of sense of who we are, you know, urban, older students, CE focus, not that we aren't transfer focused too. It's just that sometimes, you know, colleges that have large CE programs are viewed differently than colleges that are more, you know, like transfer or have more traditional students, you know, i.e. High school, you know, people just graduating from high school and that kind of thing. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. Is there anything else you wanted me to cover about that? Okay.
I just wanted to add that we are very, very diverse. Our student demographics, majority Hispanic. We're also Vietnamese, Asian, service students. We also have international students. So it's really, really diverse.
Yeah, we are a Hispanic serving institution as well as an Asian Pacific Islander serving institution. So we have both those designations.
And given with that dynamic and diverse environment is trying to find a way to understand each group or individual's learning and how we can iterate on our offerings to reach them. And so if we can start to talk a little bit about that piece, I call it the problem. I don't think it's a problem. Maybe that's not the right word, but basically did you look at assessment and with the eye of trying to develop strategies? And as it says here on the screen, encourage thoughtful and replicable assessment practices. Can you tell me a little bit about that part?
Sure. Well, I think like most other community colleges, you know, going back a few years, we didn't do assessment as a separate thing from grading, right? That was the way it was for a long time. And, you know, I'm terrible on dates, but it seems like it was around 2008, somewhere in there, you know, that it seemed like out of the blue, which probably wasn't true, but it seemed that way. We were suddenly expected to be assessing our student learning outcomes. I just will say at the time, most courses had, upwards of 15 to 20 student learning outcomes because they were very specific. Like, in my area, you will learn how to, shade with a pencil or something like that, So it was kind of a very shocking and tumultuous time. And I'm mentioning this because it really did create a negative culture around assessment. There was a lot of upset. Our union took a very strong anti-assessment stance at the time. Like, we were basically told, just check the box, like just get it done. Don't worry about what you say. Don't worry about whether it means anything, just do it and we'll be okay. Which unfortunately really set the stage for future problems, let's put it that way. So I wouldn't say we've solved those problems. I think we have addressed them. We used to be on TrackDat, and I don't mean to compare platforms, but one of the issues we had was that we were all over the map. Some people were assessing, you could do whatever you wanted. And so there wasn't any comparison. There was no way to know what was happening. It was hard to get reports that were clean. It was like, not to say anything negative, but it just was difficult. So we switched to Illumin. And of course, anytime you switch to a new program, it's another chance for people to not be happy. And so we piloted in, I think, 2020 and 21, we did a pilot, and then we moved into Illumin as our platform in 21, 22. So we're in our second year. And what we found is, trying to strike a balance between moving forward and then getting your balance again. It's almost like walking on a tightrope. You take that step and then you just have to make sure you're not moving too fast because you don't want to fall, right? So we've been cautious in our approach. For example, we very firmly believe that the best way to assess, and I'm talking about Hui Min and myself and members of our outcomes committee, the best way to assess is using the individual student scorecard, because that's how you can get more, you can get more data that way, more relevant data. And assessing every SLO every semester, right? I mean, that would be for us the ideal. Now, we are very far from that, I would say. I know there's other colleges that are way farther along than we are in that area, but we just felt like if we throw everything at the faculty, especially because there's this sense of like, well, we shouldn't really have to do this. There's still that sense there that we're it's too fast. So we're still kind of dealing with this issue of like, what's the best way to assess? However, one of the, I would say, things that has helped us, we do have a few programs that are really like on it. They're really working hard on their assessments, and they're doing, individual student scorecards, which honestly are not that much more. I don't think they're really any more work than doing the collective, but it doesn't seem that way to people. So we do have some people out in front, like our communication studies and our math department. They're out in front. They're working towards really making their assessments very meaningful and very powerful. And then we have the opposite end. We have people that haven't done a thing, right? Nothing. They haven't touched Illumin yet. And it's like, So I think what I'm trying to say here is our problem doesn't really have to do with the platform. It has to do with the culture. And changing culture is not easy. You have to be incredibly patient, and you cannot make people wrong, because you will just lose them if you do. So we've taken this kind of tightrope approach, take a step and then rebalance. So where I'd like to see is, well, maybe that's the next slide. I don't have to talk about where we're going next yet, but that's where we've been.
Most definitely.
So we talked about, campus climate.
I'm going to just slide right there because we went through those pieces.
Yeah.
And I think that's the piece is you adjusted the tool, but you were still dealing with what you were talking about is that legacy transition. So it's not
Right.
grading, it's something separate and distinct. I need to make sure that has value, that learning outcome assessment has value. And then how do we effectively do that? So those feel that task, collective or individual scoring, is something they can find valuable in the classroom. So looking at that, that's a struggle for any institution, right? To move through that cadence. And regardless of the tool, it's important that the tool is used well, but more importantly, that you make a cultural shift. So you had identified one piece of that shift that was effective, which was finding those that were really they kind of bought into it, they understood it, and they were exercising assessment practices. If you can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe some other tools that you started or strategies that you used to kind of help as well to shift that to shift your culture?
Well, I think, there's part of me that's saying, well, we haven't shifted our culture. We're working on shifting our culture. But I think the thing that you see, and I think this is across the board, it's not just in the SLO assessment, is that you have people who you can really work with, to leverage their enthusiasm, to leverage their outcomes assessments, to show, to demonstrate the value of it. And also, to really let people know that it's not that hard. It's not like you're spending hours more to do it better. You can work smarter, basically, when it comes to this. So I think that this is a resource that we're starting to tap into a little more. We have we've been talking about, getting going. I think one of the problems is that you can kind of get in the weeds with SLO assessment. Like, you're troubleshooting so much, and you're working with people who, honestly, they forget every time, how to use the tool. So, it feels like you can feel like you're stuck in the mud sometimes. So developing a solution, I think, really leveraging the front runners more. But I also think, that you need to be inclusive. For example, we have this idea that we want to do our own little symposium, at the college level about not just assessment, but how to use data. That's another issue, I think, for us. It's like we have great data people at our college, but we don't really know what we're doing, most of us, when it comes to data. We don't know what we're looking for. So we just kind of throw stuff up there and okay, it looks good, So we talked about having this sort of a panel discussion about SLO assessment and how we can make it better for everyone. I know Hui Min's been working closely with you folks at Illumin to link Canvas and Illumin so that we can do the grading. When you're grading, you can actually be assessing your SLO outcomes at the same time. That's kind of a holy grail for us. But I think we've made a lot of progress, but it's not something that we're going to really be able to implement on a large scale in the near future. Probably not we might be able to pilot it in the spring. And we've had some, issues like you always have with this kind of data talking back and forth. But really more important is like how to get people thinking about their SLO data differently. When you go back to the origin of the cultural problem that we have, it's based on, people being upset that they felt like they were being questioned, like their ability to teach or their ability to assess how their students were doing was being questioned by outsiders, and it became very personal for people. So how do you shift it? Because it's not about the teacher. We kind of thought it was. We acted like it was. It's like, well, we're just going to make it check the box and say, yes, we did it. And we did a fine job at it. And we're good people. But it's not about us. It's about the students. And how are we communicating that to the students? And I think that that's an area where we have an incredible amount of work to do, because we're not really communicating to the students their student outcomes. It's like there's still this sense that the student outcomes are something that we had to sort of tack on to our syllabi versus them actually driving how we teach and how we're communicating with our students about how they're doing. I know we went to a breakout session many years, it seems like many years ago, it was actually pre-pandemic, about shifting the conversation about student success to the student learning outcomes versus the points or, the grades, because we all know, when students are focused on grades and points, they're not really focused on the material that you're teaching. But when you shift to talking about how they're doing with this outcome, that they're doing great on this outcome, but this outcome needs work. It's like, well, what do I have to do to make it better? It's not about getting more points. It's about what you need to learn. So that's a huge shift. And I think that I'm not really sure how we're going to really approach that. I feel like we are at a point where we need to kind of circle the wagons a little bit and bring everybody in, bring the leaders in, people who are doing SLO assessment, taking it very seriously, and people who understand how to work with data, and people who can really kind of lead the conversation, because we can't lead the conversation effectively by ourselves. So, developing a solution, well, I think that's where we are, is having those conversations about how can we improve this, and how can we communicate to faculty that we're not saying anything about their ability to teach or assess. It's really more about what is actually happening in your classroom. How are your students actually doing with your student learning outcomes? So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, well, I think it's really important is because when you think of a solution, it's not just bringing in a tool and poof, everything just happens. It's working with your community to bring them through a roadmap of success. And I think you're really presenting that in a couple of ways. The first approach that you took and your team took was to pilot a tool, right? I think that's important because you begin to understand it, but you also familiarize your community with what is now on board, right?
Yeah.
But that's just the tool. It's really about the conversations that the tool stimulates. So it's bringing it from, I'm assessing in these different ways, I'm using different opportunities to assess, and we don't have a way to bring it together. Now we have a tool that brings the data together.
Right.
And by the way, allows us to disaggregate the data. We can learn about our individual learners, but still have to know what the tool is. And we have to have conversations on what that value is that brings to our community.
Well, and I'm sure one of the hurdles, this next slide, I would say, rather than I would say do, because we still face them, but the funding hurdle. Like, one thing I want to do is develop data coaches, from the faculty. That's not I mean, I don't expect people just to volunteer to do that. I mean, usually that's the kind of thing where you get a stipend or a non-instructional assignment or whatever. You know, we don't have adequate funding. And I mean, who does, right? But we don't. And we don't have adequate support technically. So those are some of the hurdles we face. I think another potential asset for us is our, commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, anti-racism, accessibility, all of it, right? Because and I'm sure that we're not alone in this at all, that's a really big focus for us. And when you're looking at those things, well, then you really need that disaggregated data. How do you get it? Like how do you, like when we have all of these initiatives and we have all of these cohorts and they're working on things, it's like, can we use those cohorts? Can we use those people who are doing the deep dive to actually start shifting the way that they're gathering the data, shift the way that they're viewing the data and sharing the data? So I think that that's kind of addressing one of those hurdles, which is how do you get started? How do you get some traction? So, we can't throw money at it because we don't have the money to throw at it. And I wish we did, but we need to look at our resources more broadly. Anyway, I'm sure there's lots of other hurdles, but I probably already spoken about them, like just dealing with the reticence of people to actually do assessment. Again, going back to the culture is a hurdle.
Right, right. So the idea is to get the community to start to assess, but also to be able to look at the data in a way that informs them and informs their decisions, both in the classroom for their programs and in the institution overall.
Yeah.
And I think where that leads to in this area, I'd love to dive in just on several of the key areas you've highlighted, which is you're working through that cultural shift. And so with that, you have a tool, you have new conversations, you have ways to get data quickly, easily in one resource, right? But you had mentioned a couple things on this cultural piece that I'd love to dive into. I think it would be valuable for all of us on the call. Where you're talking about, I would say, communication. One was having the panel discussion, which is, I think, a great tool. And then secondly, starting to dive into how do we communicate this to students, right?
Exactly.
That's really tricky, but it's their learning and it's about them in the
Right.
end. So if we can maybe dive in just a little bit on that panel, why you think this might be a good time. Just do that and then moving to that next area.
Sure. Well, I think the panel, when I look at what I want to, who I want to have on that panel, I want to have those front runners, but I want to have the people that are not the front runners too. I don't know if I can get somebody who hasn't done anything in Illumin yet, but what is the other side of it? What are the problems people have? What's holding you up? So that we're not just saying, oh, look, you got to do this. It's great. Because that doesn't really work. So have a panel that really kind of gives voice to multiple perspectives on the whole thing. And it's not about Illumin, it's about assessment. And, I know there's going to be plenty of people say, I don't want to learn a new platform. Why can't you stick to the same platform? Blah, 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 blah. That, that's done. We're done with that. So that's what I see with the panel, and have, our VPAA, our instructional vice president, because that person is critical in this. Have counselors. I mean, really have a cross section so that we are not just focusing on one view, and also to really understand how what we do impacts things like accreditation, impacts student success, like really have it be student focused and institutional focused, rather than like somebody's just griping about one aspect of it. So that's kind of how I envisioned the panel. And I'm sorry, what was the second part?
And then what are your thoughts, or is the community, or I should say committee, talking about with regards to helping students understand this as well and
Oh, right,
communicating with them? Mhm.
Well, that, I think, this is one of those places where I'd like to throw some money at it, which is the student portal, because this is a really, really weak area for us. And it's something that we've been trying to address, which is the student access to their ed plans, to, it's just weak. And I've been trying to get people to say, hey, we could adopt the student portal as a method of communication with our students. But, the appetite for that right now is just not very high, because we're, scrambling to pay for the, stuff that we absolutely have to have. So I think one thing we really need to do is look at it not from a technology point of view, but look at it from what's the difference. One thing I'm thinking about is we are starting a cohort, and I'm trying to remember the acronym is, we have so many acronyms, right? But it's basically aimed at diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and accessibility. It like incorporating that into the classroom, incorporating it into the way that we work. And I think that's a great opportunity for us to start working with data and how we get that data, because again, disaggregating data at a section level is not going to give you statistically significant data. But when you take that same, like in the math department, let's say we have a lot of courses, a lot of sections. If you start to look at the course that way, or the program that way, then you start getting the data, so that we can start to think about, how we are communicating back to the student. We also have something called peer-led team learning, and I'm sure a lot of colleges have this, but we are really looking at building that out. And I think that that's a place where the communication with the student can really get a big boost, because, our peer-led team leaders are students. And if we can kind of incorporate some training in that area, where we're training our student leaders to talk about outcomes versus grades, to shift the focus. I think that that's another tool that we could really leverage. And I think the other thing too, and this is just one of my ways of looking at life, but it's like, I guess I call it like the 20-60-20 rule, which is like, there's going to be about 20% of the people that you're not going to get on board. And there's going to be about 20% of the people that are already on board. And then there's about 60% of the people that, could go either way. And you just don't have to bother with that 20% that's never going to get on board, because it's a waste of time. That can drag you down. It can make you feel like you're not getting anywhere when you see that there's people that are just not engaged. Don't focus on them. Focus on the people that could be engaged, focus on the people that are engaged. It's just keeping your morale up sometimes when you're a coordinator is hard. You just, sometimes you feel like you're like Sisyphus, pushing the rock up the hill. But look at what is working, and look at the people that are really doing a great job, and celebrate them, and don't make people wrong. So anyway, I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I think that's what's important that you're presenting, is that you're entertaining new conversations. So just in this particular image was the idea that you brought Illumin on to essentially meet those accreditation requirements, but also with accreditation requirements, it was a tool to excite new conversations on campus. And from those conversations, you can then advance your practices, right? And that's where you're at. And I think it's interesting to think about the different ways in which you've gone about that journey. And you've kind of reaching this idea of continuous improvement, which we're all working and striving for. But you've decided we'll bring on a tool, we pilot, we launch, and then we iterate and we increase conversations because of it. And then we make changes from there. And I think that's the piece. It's a journey. This tool helps, right? But it isn't, it can't work alone. It has to work with additional conversations, the panel, like you spoke about, as well as figuring out how to make it more transparent to students. Utilizing the Canvas integration is one tool way, and then we still need to have conversations around that as well. And so just as for those that haven't possibly engaged with Illumin much, I do want to make sure everyone knows that the tool is that we're talking about with Illumin is that it is an integrated software that facilitates your curriculum development, your learning outcome assessment, your program review practices, in order to iterate, kind of bring it full circle on where we need to go next with our offerings, right? So we can meet the new learner.
Well, and also,
well,
another thing that you just reminded me of is we're just launching program review now. This is going to be our first year. And I think that is going to help with the SLOs because, you pull your data in from Illumin, right? The SLO data that's put in Illumin, you just pull it into your program review. It's like pressing a button. But if you don't have anything in Illumin, you can't do that, right? If people haven't been, doing it. So this is going to put a little pressure on folks. But the whole idea of integration, I think, again, this is where it sounds good, but people don't really care about it all that much. I just want to teach my class, do it my way. And that's fine. People there's academic freedom and all that, but there needs to be integration. There needs to be communication. And this is where it's like finding those ways, like multiple ways for people to engage. One thing I think we've done really well at is training. Like Huimin and I have offered training like once or twice a week for how long? Seems like a long time. But that, and people can email us or whatever and say, I would like a private training or like a training for this group or whatever. And we are very compliant with that. We really try to make sure we're giving people the personal time. And that really helps because then people feel like they're not being left out unless they want to be left out, So I feel like we've done a really good job with just keeping people informed and, giving them opportunities, et cetera.
And that is important,
so that
right? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry, who we mean?
That goes back to what Judith mentioned earlier, the tightrope and taking baby steps and not to overwhelm people. And really, it's very, it feels very daunting and overwhelming to change the institutional culture, but we're actually in the middle of it. So compare where we are to a few years ago, probably there has been a lot of positive changes. And that's the second point, and that is to focus on the people who are on board, who want to get on board, and to keep this going and not to focus on the negative energy. So I think we're on a good track. So to add to what this diagram is showing, it starts from curriculum development. We're participatory governance, and we have institutional instructional policies curriculum committee in charge of that. We still need to work with them hopefully eventually bringing them on board into Illumin. And we actually started from outcomes assessment, this centerpiece, when we launched Illumin, and then moved on to program review piece, which Judith has engineered very much details how things would flow for different programs. So it's a very complex process, and we are so through all these workshops that we offered, I feel that people feel that we're very accessible, and we're always there for their support, and especially Judith is just is phenomenal in every sense.
Thank you.
I would agree too, and both of you to work with and your team. And with that, I just wanted to highlight as we start to get towards the end of our webinar is that these strategies that you're employing, San Jose, has been ones we've shared with other clients that we work with as well, because these are really strong ways to begin to increase assessment practices or improve assessment practices, but also to start to have different types of conversations on campus so that we can meet the needs of the students and those that we want to bring to our colleges. Additionally, we at Illumin do work and partner with our campuses, just like you're hearing in this webinar quite a bit, and especially in our new initiative called the Connect Consortium. And in order to help support our colleges and their desire to increase faculty completion of learning outcome assessments, we are releasing some new features at the end of February that should hopefully support that. These features are ones that our clients, we partnered with them like San Jose to identify what we can do in our software to make your jobs better, right? And improve the information that you have at your fingertips to make decisions. And so some of those changes, and you'll see at the end of February, is we have improved navigation, a little more intuitive, a little bit easier to move around. Also, some more enhancements in our catalog and curriculum product, just more reports, quicker movement through there, as well as we've also improved our assessment processes so that faculty kind of have a quick area that they access immediately when they come into the site to be able to post their scoring. We are continuing to develop our APIs to make it even easier to work with your SIS, as well as our integration with our LMS. Of course, many of you probably know we have a very strong relationship with Canvas, and that is continuing to improve greatly. So I do suggest if you're interested in learning more, we are having our webinar on February 23rd. We'll be sending out those links so that you can register if you're interested. But with that, I wanted to just highlight if there's any last thoughts from you, Judith or Huimin, we could share with anyone.
Well, I tend to be a little bit, I get a little hyper focused sometimes. So this is a great chance for me to kind of step back a little and see the big picture. I would just say everybody's in a different place, and wherever you are, I think it's really important to celebrate those things that have been working, celebrate the victories, and just, process is never, it never goes the way you think it's going to go. I'm saying that from an artist's point of view too. It's like let things flow and just really honestly work with people, not, not focusing on what's wrong, but focusing on just the journey itself, just the pathway itself, because it's going to go where it's going to go. That's pretty much it.
Right. So my view, instead of so Judith, you provided very grand overarching view. So I would say more from the baby steps point of view. So I would see that the Illumin Canvas integration as very important step forward toward this process in bringing more and more faculty and coordinators on board, just to show them how easy it is it's no different than their normal grading or assignment. We already use Canvas, we already use Illumin, and a lot of people feel more comfortable with Canvas. Then we can meet them halfway or meet them where they are and bring them on board. Thank you.
Fantastic. I think that's really good information. So as we look to improve our ability to work with our community. So with that, I would really like to thank you, Judith Bell and Dr. McKinley, and our interpreters, Chrissy and Amber, for your work to really help us share San Jose's story and journey in the hopes that it's supporting all of us as we engage in these conversations around assessment and, most importantly, student success.
Right.
So thank you, everyone that is attending today. We are here if you have any questions, and would love to also work with any of you in the future. Put our information with Illumin here as well. But if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, or we can unmute you, and happy to have these conversations. We have a couple more minutes left in our session before it goes to break. So with that, thank you.
Thank you.